Hey everyone, hope you're doing well, and I'm so glad you've decided to join us again. Tonight we are exploring day in the life of a Japanese monk in 1600. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you genuinely enjoy our nighttime stories, let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so fascinating to see who's joining us from around the globe. Now it's time to dim the lights and relax as we start our story. The morning bell resonates through the mountain air at the hour of the tiger, its bronze voice carrying across the wooden halls of Sujiji Temple in the province of Noto. Brother Kenjiro awakens on his tatami mat, the woven rice straw beneath him still holding the faint warmth of his sleeping body. The air carries the scent of cedar incense from the previous evening's ceremonies, mingling with the clean smell of morning mist that drifts through the paper screens of the monks' quarters. The wooden floors of the dormitory creak softly as 23 monks rise in unison, their movements practiced and deliberate. Each monk folds his cotton sleeping robe with precise movements, the fabric rustling quietly as it is arranged in the prescribed manner. The folding follows a pattern established by the temple's regulations, each crease falling at measured intervals, the final arrangement creating a rectangle, exactly 18 fingers in width and 12 in length. Brother Kenjiro's hands move through the familiar motions of morning preparation. His razor, crafted by the metal workers of Kyoto, requires careful handling as he removes the night's growth from his scalp and face. The blade moves in long, steady strokes, each pass requiring attention to the angle and pressure. The process takes the duration of 30 breaths, counted silently as prescribed by the temple's morning procedures. Water for washing comes from the mountain spring that feeds the temple grounds, collected each evening in ceramic vessels glazed with ash from the temple's furnaces. The water holds the mineral taste of granite and moss, cold enough to sharpen the mind and prepare the body for the day's observances. Each monk uses exactly 1 ladle of water for washing hands and face, the excess returning to the wooden basin that will later nourish the temple gardens. The morning meal preparation begins in the kitchen quarters, before the first light appears above the eastern peaks. Brother Hagen, the temple's appointed cook, tends to fires that have burned continuously since the autumn months began. The charcoal, prepared from oak trees grown on the temple lands, burns with steady heat that requires constant attention. Each piece of charcoal is selected for its size and density, arranged in patterns that ensure even heating of the large iron pots used for cooking rice. Rice preparation follows procedures established during the Muromachi period, refined through generations of temple practice. The grains grown in terraced fields, maintained by the temple community, undergo washing in 7 changes of water. Each washing removes dust and broken grains, the water becoming progressively clearer until it runs transparent from the wooden washing bowls. The final washing water is saved for later use in cleaning the kitchen utensils, nothing wasted in the careful economy of temple life. The rice cooking process requires precise timing and attention to the sounds emanating from beneath the heavy wooden lids. Brother Hagen listens for the subtle changes in the bubbling rhythm that indicate when the heat should be reduced, when additional water might be needed, when the grains have achieved the proper texture for the morning meal. This knowledge comes from years of training under the previous cook, accumulated through seasons of careful observation and correction. Miso soup preparation begins with the selection of dried ingredients stored in ceramic crocks sealed with pine resin. The soybeans used for miso paste were harvested the previous autumn, fermented through winter months in wooden vats buried partially underground to maintain consistent temperature. The fermentation process creates complex flavors that vary subtly from batch to batch, influenced by weather patterns, humidity levels, and the particular mixture of beneficial bacteria that develops in each container. Wakame seaweed arrives at the temple through trading relationships established with coastal communities in Ekizen province. The dried seaweed travels inland packed in wooden boxes lined with mulberry paper, each sheet of seaweed carefully layered to prevent crushing. Before use, the wakame requires soaking in spring water until it expands to many times its dried size, the process taking exactly the time required for Brother Hagen to complete the preparation of miso broth. The preparation of miso broth involves dissolving measured amounts of fermented soybean paste in hot water heated to specific temperatures, judged by the steam patterns rising from the pot surface. Too much heat destroys the beneficial properties of the fermented paste, while insufficient heat fails to release the full range of flavors developed during the fermentation months. Brother Huygens stirs the mixture with a wooden paddle carved from mountain cherry, the smooth surface preventing any disturbance to the delicate flavor balance. Morning service begins when the temple bell sounds its second sequence of strikes, each tone measured and deliberate. The monks file into the main hall following established patterns of movement, their positions determined by years of residence at the temple, their roles in temple administration, and their progress in Buddhist studies. The wooden floors, polished smooth by decades of stockinged feet, reflect the soft light from candles arranged in brass holders crafted by artisans in distant Kanazawa. Brother Kenjo takes his assigned position in the third row of seated monks, his meditation cushion filled with buckwheat hulls that have been carefully cleaned and dried during the previous summer months. The cushion requires periodic adjustment to maintain proper posture during extended periods of seated meditation, the hulls shifting and settling to support the spine in precise alignment prescribed by meditation manuals copied and recopied in the temple scriptorium. The morning sutras begin with the Heart Sutra, chanted in voices that blend and separate in practiced harmonies. Each monk's voice contributes to the collective sound while maintaining individual clarity, the result of years of training in proper breathing techniques and pronunciation of Sanskrit syllables adapted to Japanese phonetic patterns. The chanting creates resonances in the wooden hall that seem to amplify and extend each syllable, creating layers of sound that rise and fall like gentle waves. Incense burning during morning service requires careful attention to the quality and preparation of aromatic materials. The temple uses sandalwood imported through trading networks that extend to distant kingdoms beyond the southern seas, mixed with local materials including powdered cedar bark and dried flowers from temple gardens. Each batch of incense is prepared according to formulas recorded in ledgers maintained by successive generations of temple administrators. The grinding of incense materials takes place using stone mortars carved from granite quarried in the nearby mountains. The grinding process requires steady circular motions that gradually reduce solid materials to fine powders without generating excessive heat that might damage delicate aromatic compounds. Brother Shinkai, responsible for incense preparation, counts exactly 400 grinding motions for each batch, the number prescribed in temple regulations established during the early years of the Sengoku period. Mixing of ground incense materials follows precise proportions recorded in measurements based on traditional weights derived from rice grain standards. 3 parts sandalwood powder combine with 1 part cedar bark and ½ part dried chrysanthemum petals, the mixture bound together with drops of pine resin dissolved in rice wine. The binding process creates small pellets that burn slowly and evenly, each pellet designed to burn for exactly the duration of 20 breaths. Morning meditation follows the completion of sutra chanting, the transition marked by the sound of a small bronze bell struck once with a wooden mallet. The sitting position requires careful attention to posture, hands folded in the prescribed mudra position, breathing regulated through techniques practiced daily for years. The meditation period lasts for the time required for 12 sticks of incense to burn completely, their smoke rising in thin streams toward the wooden ceiling beams darkened by centuries of incense burning. During meditation, Brother Kenjo's attention focuses on breathing patterns that follow established rhythms taught by meditation masters. Each breath involves conscious attention to the expansion and contraction of the diaphragm, the flow of air through nasal passages, the slight pause between inhalation and exhalation. The technique requires years of practice to achieve the natural rhythm that allows the mind to settle into states of calm awareness without forcing or straining. The temple grounds require constant maintenance throughout the changing seasons, work that begins after the morning meal and continues throughout the daylight hours. Brother Jishin oversees the care of gardens that include both practical vegetable plots and ornamental arrangements designed to support meditation practice. The garden work follows seasonal patterns established over generations, each task timed to correspond with natural cycles of growth and dormancy. Vegetable gardens produce much of the food consumed by the temple community. including several varieties of radish adapted to the mountain climate, Chinese cabbage that stores well through winter months, and soybeans used for making both miso paste and tofu. The cultivation techniques follow agricultural practices refined through centuries of temple farming, adapted to the specific soil conditions and weather patterns of the mountain location. Soil preparation begins each spring with the application of compost created from kitchen scraps, fallen leaves, and human waste processed through carefully managed composting systems. The compost piles require regular turning with wooden tools, attention to moisture levels, and monitoring of temperature changes that indicate proper decomposition of organic materials. The finished compost has the dark color and rich smell of forest soil, teeming with beneficial organisms that improve soil fertility. Planting schedules follow lunar calendar calculations maintained in records kept by the temple's agricultural coordinator. Seeds planted during specific lunar phases show improved germination rates and stronger growth patterns, observations recorded and verified over multiple growing seasons. The moon phase calendar also determines optimal times for harvesting, preserving, and storing food crops to last through winter months when fresh vegetables become scarce. Weeding requires daily attention during growing seasons, work performed in early morning hours when dew softens the soil around unwanted plants. The monks use hand tools crafted by local metal workers, including small hoes with blades shaped for working between closely planted vegetables, and narrow cultivators for loosening soil around plant roots. Each tool receives careful maintenance, including regular sharpening and oiling to prevent rust in the humid mountain climate. Irrigation systems channel water from mountain streams through carefully constructed channels lined with flat stones. The water flow requires constant adjustment using wooden gates and stone dams that can be modified to direct water to different sections of gardens depending on seasonal needs and rainfall patterns. During dry periods, additional water comes from storage ponds fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. The temple scriptorium provides essential services for maintaining religious texts and administrative records, work that continues throughout the year regardless of weather conditions. Brother Dogen supervises the copying of sutras, temple regulations, and correspondence with other Buddhist institutions throughout Japan. The work requires specialized materials including paper made from mulberry bark, ink ground from pine soot and animal glue, and brushes crafted from various animal hairs. Paper making takes place during winter months when other agricultural work decreases, using mulberry bark harvested during the previous growing season. The bark requires soaking in wooden vats filled with mountain spring water, followed by boiling in large iron cauldrons until the fibers separate from woody materials. The separated fibers undergo beating with wooden mallets until they achieve the proper consistency for paper formation. The paper forming process uses screens woven from bamboo strips, each screen requiring replacement after several months of use as the bamboo strips begin to separate or crack. Fresh bamboo comes from groves maintained on temple lands, harvested during specific seasons when the bamboo contains optimal moisture content for weaving. The cutting and preparation of bamboo screens requires several weeks of work performed during winter months when outdoor agricultural tasks diminish. Ink preparation begins with the collection of pine soot from specially constructed burning chambers where pine wood burns under controlled conditions to produce consistent quality soot. The soot collection process requires careful attention to burning temperatures and airflow patterns that affect the fineness and purity of collected particles. Poor quality soot produces ink that clogs brush tips or creates uneven lines on paper surfaces. Animal glue used for binding ink comes from fish bones and cattle hides obtained through trading relationships with communities in lower valleys. The preparation of glue involves prolonged boiling of bone and hide materials until they dissolve into concentrated solutions that gel when cooled. The concentration must be precise to create ink that flows smoothly from brush tips while maintaining adequate adhesion to paper fibers. Brush making requires careful selection of animal hairs with properties suited to different types of writing and painting tasks. Rabbit hair provides softness for delicate calligraphy, while badger hair offers firmness for bold strokes and official documents. The hairs undergo cleaning processes that remove oils and debris, followed by careful sorting to select only the finest specimens for brush construction. The binding of brush hairs into functional tools uses silk thread wound in specific patterns that secure the hairs while allowing flexibility for varied stroke techniques. Each brush requires several hours of construction time, including the carving of bamboo handles and the application of protective lacquer coatings that preserve the tools through years of regular use. Administrative tasks occupy significant portions of each day, including the maintenance of records documenting temple activities, financial transactions and correspondence with government officials. Brother Mind serves as the temple's principal administrator, responsible for maintaining account books that record every transaction involving temple resources. The accounting system uses traditional Japanese calculation methods supplemented by written records maintained in bound ledgers created in the temple scriptorium. Each transaction requires documentation including the date according to both lunar and solar calendar systems, the names of all parties involved, detailed descriptions of goods or services exchanged, and signatures or seals of authorized temple officials. Income sources for the temple include donations from lay supporters, payments for religious services performed for local communities, and sales of agricultural products grown on temple lands. Each income source requires different types of record keeping to satisfy both temple regulations and government taxation requirements imposed by local daimyo authorities. Donations arrive in various forms including rice, other food products, textiles, metal goods, and occasionally silver or gold coins minted by authorized government facilities. Each donation requires evaluation to determine its value in relation to standard measurements used in temple accounting systems, a process that sometimes involves consultation with merchants familiar with current market conditions. Religious services performed for local communities include funeral ceremonies, memorial services for deceased family members, blessing ceremonies for new constructions or business ventures, and seasonal observances marking important points in the agricultural calendar. Each service requires preparation of specific ritual materials, arrangement of altar decorations, and coordination with family members or community leaders, organizing the events. The preparation of ritual materials involves creation of specialized paper items including prayer flags, memorial tablets, and decorative elements used in altar arrangements. These items require careful cutting, folding, and inscription, using techniques passed down through generations of temple craftsmen. Each item must conform to established specifications regarding size, color, and textual content appropriate to different types of ceremonies. Afternoon work periods focus on maintenance tasks essential for preserving temple buildings and equipment through changing weather conditions and normal wear from daily use. Brother Kame supervises repair work that includes replacement of paper screens, maintenance of wooden floors and structural elements, and care of metal objects including bells, ritual implements, and cooking equipment. Paper screen replacement requires careful removal of damaged paper without disturbing the wooden framework that supports the screens. New paper must be cut to precise dimensions and applied using paste made from rice flour cooked to specific consistency. The application process requires steady hands and attention to air bubbles or wrinkles that would create weak points prone to tearing. Wood maintenance includes regular cleaning with damp cloths followed by application of natural oils that preserve the wood while maintaining its natural appearance. Different types of wood require different treatment methods, with cedar structural elements receiving different care than pine floors or bamboo decorative elements. The oils used include pressed oils from various nuts and seeds, each chosen for specific preservation properties. Metal object maintenance requires regular polishing, with abrasive materials including fine sand mixed with vegetable oils, applied using cloth pads in circular motions that remove oxidation while avoiding scratches that would damage decorated surfaces. Bronze ritual implements receive particular attention as their appearance affects the dignity of religious ceremonies performed before lay visitors to the temple. Evening meal preparation begins during late afternoon hours, following similar procedures to morning meal preparation, but adapted to different seasonal ingredients and nutritional requirements appropriate to the day's activities. Brother Heinjen varies the evening menu based on available ingredients, seasonal considerations, and special observances that might require particular foods or preparation methods.
Seasonal ingredients during autumn months include persimmons from trees maintained on temple grounds, wild mushrooms gathered from mountain forests under careful supervision to avoid potentially dangerous varieties, and late vegetables harvested before frost damages the plants. Each ingredient requires specific preparation methods to maximize nutritional value while creating harmonious flavor combinations appropriate to temple dietary practices. Persimmon preparation involves careful selection of fruits at optimal ripeness, followed by peeling and cutting into uniform pieces suitable for addition to various dishes. Overripe persimmons become too soft for most uses, while underripe fruits have astringent qualities that make them unpalatable. The timing of persimmon harvest requires daily inspection of fruit condition throughout the ripening season. Wild mushroom identification requires extensive knowledge of local varieties, their preferred growing conditions, and reliable methods for distinguishing edible species from potentially harmful ones. Brother Mushin, who oversees mushroom gathering, learned identification techniques through years of training under experienced foragers, and maintains detailed written records of successful gathering locations and seasonal timing. The cleaning and preparation of wild mushrooms involves careful inspection of each specimen, removal of debris and insects, and trimming of damaged portions using sharp knives maintained specifically for food preparation. Different mushroom varieties require different preparation methods, with some species requiring extended cooking to eliminate mildly toxic compounds that become harmless when properly processed. Evening service begins when shadows from western mountains reach the temple courtyard, the timing varying gradually throughout the seasonal cycle as daylight hours shorten or lengthen. The service includes chanting of different sutras than those used during morning observances, creating daily variation in the spiritual practices while maintaining consistent overall structure throughout the year. Candle preparation for evening service requires attention to the wick trimming and wax condition of candles used throughout the temple buildings. Each candle receives inspection for cracks or other damage that might cause unsafe burning, with damaged candles set aside for melting and reforming into new candles during designated craft periods. The wax used for temple candles comes from beehives maintained on temple grounds, supplemented by plant-based waxes extracted from fruits of sumac trees that grow wild in surrounding forests. Beeswax candles burn with steady flames and pleasant aromatic qualities, while plant waxes provide acceptable alternatives when bee colonies produce insufficient wax for temple needs. Wick material comes from cotton fibers grown in temple gardens, spun into threads using spinning wheels operated by monks skilled in textile production. The thickness and twist of wick threads affects burning characteristics of finished candles, requiring careful attention to spinning techniques that produce consistent thread qualities suitable for different sizes of candles used throughout temple facilities. Evening meditation follows the completion of sutra chanting and continues until the final bell sequence signals the end of formal daily observances. The meditation period provides opportunity for individual spiritual practice adapted to each monk's level of training and personal spiritual development under guidance from senior temple residents. The transition from active work periods to evening meditation requires mental preparation techniques that help shift attention from external tasks to internal spiritual awareness. These techniques include breathing exercises that calm mental activity, body awareness practices that release physical tension accumulated during daily work, and visualization methods that support focused attention during meditation periods. Personal hygiene activities before sleep include washing of hands and face with water heated in iron pots over charcoal fires maintained in designated washing areas. The water temperature requires careful attention to avoid burns while providing sufficient warmth for effective cleaning in cool mountain temperatures that characterize autumn and winter months. Preparation for sleep includes folding of daily work clothes according to established procedures, arrangement of sleeping robes and blankets in prescribed patterns, and completion of any personal religious observances individual monks maintain as part of their spiritual practice. The temple grounds become quiet as monks settle into their sleeping quarters, the silence broken only by distant sounds of wind in mountain forests, occasional calls of night birds, and the subtle creaking of wooden buildings settling in cooling temperatures. Brother Kenjiro arranges his sleeping mat with practiced movements, the familiar routine providing transition from the day's activities to the rest that prepares body and mind for another day of temple life. Night watching duties rotate among junior monks with responsibility for maintaining security of temple buildings and grounds, tending fires that must continue burning throughout night hours, and responding to any emergency situations that might arise during darkness. The night watch requires alertness balanced with quiet respect for the sleep. Fire maintenance throughout night hours involves regular addition of charcoal to braziers used for heating important temple spaces, careful monitoring of cooking fires that must be ready for early morning meal preparation, and attention to the eternal flame maintained before the main altar as part of ongoing religious observances. The checking of braziers requires attention to airflow patterns that affect burning efficiency, arrangement of charcoal pieces to ensure steady heat production, and removal of ash accumulation that might interfere with proper burning. Each brazier receives inspection at regular intervals timed by the burning of incense sticks used to measure passage of time during night hours. Cooking fire maintenance involves banking of coals in arrangements that preserve heat while minimizing fuel consumption, preparation of kindling materials needed for rekindling fires at dawn, and organization of cooking implements needed for morning meal preparation. The transition between night fire maintenance and morning cooking requires precise timing to ensure fires reach proper temperatures exactly when needed for meal preparation. Security responsibilities include checking of doors and windows to ensure proper closure, listening for unusual sounds that might indicate problems with buildings or grounds, and monitoring weather conditions that might affect temple operations or create hazards for buildings or equipment. The wooden buildings expand and contract with temperature changes, creating sounds that experienced night watchmen learn to distinguish from sounds that might indicate structural problems or unauthorized intrusions. Each building has characteristic sound patterns that vary with weather conditions, seasonal changes, and the specific types of wood used in construction. Weather monitoring includes attention to wind patterns that might bring storms or create fire hazards, observation of cloud formations that indicate approaching precipitation, and assessment of temperature changes that might require adjustments to heating systems or protection of sensitive materials stored in various temple buildings.
Temperature changes affect many aspects of temple operations, including food storage conditions, preservation of written materials in the scriptorium, proper burning of incense and candles, and maintenance of comfortable conditions in sleeping quarters and meditation halls. The detailed organization of temple storage systems requires constant attention throughout the year, with different seasons bringing specific requirements for preserving various materials essential to temple operations. Brother Aishin oversees the storage facilities, located in several buildings constructed specifically for protecting different categories of temple resources from moisture, temperature fluctuations, and insect damage that could destroy valuable materials accumulated over decades of temple operations. Rice storage involves multiple granaries constructed with raised floors that prevent moisture from ground contact, walls lined with cedar planks that naturally repel insects, and roofing systems designed to shed rain while allowing air circulation that prevents mold formation in stored grain. Each granary holds rice from specific harvest years, enabling rotation of stored grain to ensure consumption of older supplies before deterioration affects nutritional value or palatability. The transfer of rice from harvest storage to daily use requires careful measurement, using standardized wooden containers marked with precise volume indicators carved into their surfaces. Each transfer receives documentation in ledgers that track quantities moved, dates of transfer, and assessment of grain quality, including color, aroma, and freedom from insect infestation or mold contamination. Quality assessment involves examination of individual grains selected randomly from different portions of each storage container, looking for signs of damage, discoloration, or unusual odors that might indicate spoilage or contamination. Damaged grain receives separation from good quality rice and finds use in animal feed or composting operations rather than human consumption. Seasonal rotation schedules ensure systematic use of stored grain based on harvest dates and storage conditions, preventing accumulation of old grain that might deteriorate beyond acceptable quality standards. The rotation system requires detailed record keeping that tracks each batch of stored grain from initial storage through final consumption or alternative use, Textile storage involves protection of cotton fabrics, silk materials, and hemp cloth used for various temple purposes, including clothing, ceremonial banners, and utilitarian applications such as food straining and equipment covering. Each textile material requires specific storage conditions based on fiber characteristics and intended uses within temple operations. Cotton fabric storage uses wooden chests lined with camphor wood that naturally repels insects attracted to organic fibers, while silk materials receive protection in sealed ceramic containers with tight-fitting lids that exclude moisture and air circulation that might cause deterioration of delicate silk proteins over extended storage periods. Hemp cloth, valued for its durability and resistance to moisture, receives storage in open wooden shelving systems that allow air circulation while protecting the materials from direct contact with dust or debris that might accumulate in storage areas. Hemp materials find extensive use in temple operations due to their strength and longevity under regular washing and heavy use. The preparation of storage containers involves careful selection of wood types appropriate to different storage requirements, with cedar providing natural insect-repelling properties, pine offering economical construction for less sensitive materials, and hardwoods such as oak providing maximum protection for valuable items requiring long-term preservation. Wood treatment for storage containers includes application of natural preservatives derived from plant oils and tree resins that protect against insect damage and moisture penetration, without introducing chemical odors that might contaminate stored materials. The treatment process requires multiple applications over several weeks to achieve complete penetration of protective substances into wood fibers. Metalworking activities within the temple community include maintenance and repair of iron tools, bronze ritual implements, and copper vessels used for various temple functions. Brother Tetsuo manages the metalworking operations, utilizing a small forge constructed in a separate building to minimize fire hazard to other temple structures, while providing adequate ventilation for metalworking processes. Iron tool maintenance involves regular inspection for rust formation, edge sharpening using whetstones quarried from specific mountain locations known for producing superior abrasive stones, and handle replacement when wooden components show signs of cracking or loosening that might create safety hazards during tool use. The selection of iron for tool construction requires knowledge of different iron qualities available through trading relationships with metal workers in distant regions, with some iron sources producing metal that holds sharp edges better than others, while certain iron types prove more resistant to rust formation in the humid mountain climate surrounding the temple. Forge operation requires careful attention to fire management, using charcoal produced from specific wood types that burn at temperatures suitable for metal working while producing minimal smoke that might disturb temple activities or create air quality problems in enclosed working spaces. Oak charcoal provides optimal burning characteristics for most metal working tasks, while cherry wood charcoal burns hotter for specialized applications requiring higher temperatures. Bronze working involves repair and maintenance of ritual implements, including bells, incense burners, and ceremonial vessels that require specialized techniques different from iron working due to the unique properties of bronze alloys used in traditional metal working applications. Bronze repair often involves careful heating and reshaping rather than cutting and welding techniques used with iron materials. The casting of replacement bronze items requires construction of clay molds formed around wooden patterns carved to precise dimensions needed for specific ritual implements. The clay molding process uses special clay mixtures that withstand high temperatures without cracking while producing smooth surfaces that require minimal finishing work on completed bronze castings. Copper vessel maintenance includes regular polishing to maintain attractive appearance appropriate for temple use, repair of dents and damage from regular handling, and replacement of worn handles or other components that receive heavy use during daily temple operations. Copper vessels find extensive use in temple kitchens due to their excellent heat conduction properties and durability under regular washing. Textile production within the temple includes spinning of cotton and hemp fibers into threads used for various temple applications, weaving of cloth for clothing and utilitarian purposes, and dyeing of finished textiles using dyes extracted from local plant materials grown specifically for textile coloring applications. Cotton preparation begins with cleaning of raw cotton to remove seeds, debris, and short fibers unsuitable for spinning into strong threads. The cleaning process uses wooden combs with metal teeth that separate usable fibers while removing unwanted materials that would create weak points in finished threads or introduce foreign matter into textile products. Spinning techniques utilize wooden spinning wheels constructed by temple craftsmen using traditional methods passed down through generations of textile workers. Each spinning wheel requires regular maintenance, including lubrication of moving parts, replacement of worn components, and adjustment of tension mechanisms that control thread thickness and consistency during spinning operations. Hemp fiber preparation involves retting processes that use controlled decomposition to separate usable fibers from woody plant materials, followed by beating and combing operations that align fibers for spinning into threads suitable for weaving into durable cloth products. Hemp processing requires several weeks from initial plant harvesting through finished fiber ready for spinning operations. Weaving operations use wooden looms constructed according to traditional designs adapted to specific types of cloth production needed for temple use. Different loom configurations enable production of various cloth weights and weaving patterns appropriate to different applications, including fine cloth for ceremonial use and heavy cloth for utilitarian applications. Thread preparation for weaving includes careful measurement and arrangement of warp threads that form the foundation structure of woven cloth, followed by systematic insertion of weft threads that create the final cloth texture and pattern. Thread arrangement requires attention to consistent tension and spacing that produces even cloth texture without irregularities that might create weak points or unattractive appearance. Dyeing processes utilize plant materials including roots, bark, leaves, and flowers that produce various colors when processed according to traditional dyeing techniques. Different plant materials require different extraction methods to obtain concentrated dye solutions suitable for producing lasting colors that resist fading through washing and exposure to sunlight. Indigo cultivation and processing represents one of the most complex dyeing operations undertaken at the temple, involving cultivation of indigo plants in designated garden areas, harvesting of leaves at optimal stages of plant development, and fermentation processes that convert plant materials into concentrated dyeing compounds suitable for producing deep blue colors highly valued for ceremonial textiles. The indigo fermentation process requires careful attention to temperature control, pH balance, and timing of various processing stages that transform fresh plant materials into stable dyeing compounds. The fermentation takes place in specially constructed wooden vats buried partially underground to maintain consistent temperatures throughout seasonal weather variations. Medicinal plant cultivation occupies designated sections of temple gardens where monks grow plants used for treating common health problems that affect temple residents and local community members who seek medical assistance from temple practitioners trained in traditional healing methods based on Buddhist medical traditions and local folk knowledge. Medicinal plant identification requires extensive knowledge of local flora, including proper identification of beneficial plants, understanding of their therapeutic properties, appropriate harvesting timing, and processing methods that preserve active compounds while eliminating potentially harmful substances that might be present in raw plant materials. Harvesting schedules for medicinal plants follow lunar calendar calculations and seasonal timing that optimize concentration of active compounds in different plant parts used for therapeutic purposes. Root harvesting typically occurs during autumn months when plants concentrate nutrients in underground storage organs, while leaf harvesting happens during spring growth periods when foliage contains maximum concentrations of beneficial compounds. Processing of medicinal plants includes drying techniques that preserve therapeutic properties while preventing mold formation or other deterioration that might render plant materials ineffective or potentially harmful. Different plants require different drying methods based on their moisture content, chemical composition, and intended therapeutic applications. Storage of processed medicinal plants uses ceramic containers with tight-fitting lids that exclude moisture and light that might degrade active compounds over extended storage periods. Each container receives careful labeling with plant identification, harvest date, processing method, and intended therapeutic uses to ensure proper selection of materials for specific medical applications. Preparation of medicinal compounds involves grinding, mixing, and cooking processes that convert raw plant materials into forms suitable for therapeutic use, including powders,
liquid extracts and paste preparations applied externally for various conditions affecting temple residents and community members seeking medical assistance. The temple library contains manuscripts and printed materials related to Buddhist teachings, temple administration, agricultural practices, and various technical subjects relevant to temple operations. Brother Gakusho oversees library operations including maintenance of existing materials, acquisition of new texts, and organization of materials to facilitate research and reference activities conducted by temple residents. Manuscript preservation requires attention to environmental conditions including temperature control, humidity regulation, and protection from light exposure that might cause deterioration of paper and ink materials used in traditional book production. Storage areas receive design features that minimize environmental fluctuations while providing adequate air circulation to prevent moisture accumulation. Bookbinding repair involves careful disassembly of damaged bindings, assessment of paper condition, and reconstruction of book structures using traditional materials and techniques that match original construction methods. Repair work requires specialized tools including bone folders for paper creasing, awls for creating sewing holes, and needles appropriate for binding thread used in traditional bookbinding applications. Paper repair techniques address tears, stains, and other damage that affects readability of text while preserving original paper materials whenever possible, rather than replacing damaged sections with new paper that might not match original materials in appearance or aging characteristics. Repair materials include Japanese tissue paper and wheat starch paste that provide strong adhesion without creating visible repair marks. Ink preparation for manuscript copying and repair work uses traditional formulations based on pine soot and animal glue that match ink materials used in original manuscript production. Ink consistency requires careful adjustment to achieve proper flow characteristics for brush application while maintaining adequate opacity for clear text reproduction. Calligraphy practice occupies significant time for monks involved in manuscript copying and administrative record keeping, with daily exercises designed to maintain brush control and character formation skills essential for producing high-quality written materials. Practice exercises include copying of standard character forms, composition of original texts, and development of personal calligraphy styles appropriate to different types of written materials. Brush maintenance for calligraphy work includes proper cleaning procedures that remove ink residue without damaging delicate brush hairs, storage methods that preserve brush shape and flexibility, and periodic replacement of worn brushes that no longer produce acceptable line quality for important written work. Seasonal ceremonies throughout the year require extensive preparation involving coordination of ritual materials, arrangement of ceremonial spaces, and participation of temple residents in various roles essential to proper ceremony performance. Brother Shinin coordinates ceremonial activities, maintaining detailed schedules and checklists that ensure nothing is overlooked in ceremony preparation and execution. New Year ceremonies require particular attention to cleaning and preparation of all temple facilities, creation of special decorative elements appropriate to seasonal observances, and coordination with local community members who participate in temple New Year activities. Preparation begins several weeks before New Year dates and continues through completion of all ceremonial observances. Spring ceremonies celebrate renewal of natural cycles and include blessing of agricultural activities that begin each growing season. Ceremony preparation involves creation of paper prayer flags, arrangement of altar decorations using fresh flowers and greenery, and preparation of special food offerings appropriate to spring seasonal themes. Summer ceremonies focus on memorial observances for deceased community members and include elaborate altar arrangements, extended chanting sessions, and coordination with family members who participate in memorial activities. Summer ceremony preparation requires attention to heat management in temple buildings and provision of adequate ventilation for extended ceremonial activities. Autumn ceremonies celebrate harvest completion and include Thanksgiving observances for successful agricultural seasons. Ceremony preparation involves display of harvest products, creation of special food offerings using seasonal ingredients, and coordination of community participation in harvest celebration activities. Winter ceremonies prepare for seasonal transitions and include observances focused on meditation practices appropriate to contemplative periods when outdoor activities diminish due to weather conditions. Winter ceremony preparation involves attention to heating requirements for extended meditation sessions and provision of adequate lighting for ceremonial activities during shortened daylight periods. Festival coordination with local communities requires ongoing communication throughout the year to plan shared ceremonial activities that involve both temple residents and lay community members. Festival planning includes scheduling of events, coordination of food preparation, arrangement of performance activities, and management of facilities to accommodate increased numbers of participants during festival periods. Food preparation for festival events involves scaling up normal cooking operations to serve much larger numbers of people than daily temple meals, requiring coordination of additional cooking equipment, procurement of increased quantities of ingredients, and organization of volunteer workers who assist with food preparation and serving activities. Special dietary requirements during festival periods include preparation of foods suitable for lay participants who may not follow temple dietary restrictions, accommodation of seasonal food preferences and traditional festival foods expected by community participants, and provision of adequate quantities of food for extended festival activities that may continue throughout entire days. Equipment management for festivals includes arrangement of additional seating, provision of serving vessels and utensils for increased numbers of participants, setup of temporary facilities for food preparation and serving, and coordination of cleanup activities following festival completion. The night hours pass slowly and quietly, marked by the gradual progression of stars across mountain skies visible through gaps in forest canopies surrounding the temple grounds. Brother Shindro sleeps deeply on his straw mat, his breathing slow and regular, his body resting in preparation for another day of temple routines that have continued unchanged through generations of monks who have lived and practiced in this mountain sanctuary dedicated to the preservation of Buddhist teachings and the cultivation of wisdom through disciplined spiritual practice. The mountain winds carry the scent of pine and cedar through the temple grounds, rustling paper screens with gentle sounds that blend with the distant murmur of streams flowing down mountain slopes toward valleys below, where farming communities sleep in houses scattered across rice fields that will green again with spring planting when winter snows melt and seasonal cycles begin. Another year of growth and harvest in the unchanging rhythm of agricultural life that sustains both temple and secular communities in harmonious interdependence.
How they delivered court letters in 18th century France. The morning light filters through the tall windows of the Bureau de la Correspondance Royale at Versailles, casting long shadows across polished wooden tables, where clerks arrange themselves for another day of processing the endless stream of correspondence that flows between the royal court and administrative centres throughout the Kingdom of France. The year is 1745, and the machinery of royal communication operates with the precision developed through decades of refinement under successive administrations that have recognized the essential role of efficient correspondence in maintaining royal authority across vast territorial holdings. Monsieur Claude Bertrand, the chief clerk of correspondence services, arrives each morning precisely at the 7th hour, his leather satchel containing the brass keys required to unlock the various cabinets and strong boxes that secure confidential correspondence during overnight hours. The keys themselves represent different levels of security clearance, with ordinary administrative correspondence secured by common locks, while diplomatic communications and personal royal letters require keys held exclusively by senior officials authorized to handle the most sensitive materials passing through the Correspondence Bureau. The arrangement of correspondence processing follows established hierarchies that reflect both the social importance of letter recipients and the administrative urgency of various categories of official business. Letters bearing the personal seal of His Majesty King Louis XV receive immediate attention regardless of their ultimate destination, while correspondence from ministers and court officials follows processing schedules determined by the administrative significance of their governmental departments and their current standing in royal favor. Incoming correspondence arrives through multiple channels throughout each day, with the most rapid delivery reserved for communications originating from diplomatic missions in foreign capitals, where political situations might change rapidly and require immediate royal attention. The diplomatic courier service maintains relay stations at strategic points along major travel routes, connecting Paris with Vienna, Madrid, London, and other European capitals where French ambassadors conduct negotiations affecting French territorial and commercial interests. Domestic correspondence follows established postal routes that connect provincial administrative centers with the royal court, utilizing relay stations equipped with fresh horses and supplies necessary to maintain consistent travel schedules regardless of weather conditions or seasonal variations that might otherwise interrupt communication between central government officers and regional administrators responsible for implementing royal policies throughout French territorial holdings. The sorting of incoming correspondence requires careful attention to addressing protocols that identify not only the intended recipients, but also the appropriate governmental departments responsible for processing different categories of official business. Administrative correspondence addressed to the Controller General of Finances follows different processing procedures than letters intended for the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, with each ministerial department maintaining specialized personnel familiar with the specific requirements of their administrative responsibilities. Letter authentication involves examination of seals, signatures, and paper quality to verify the legitimacy of correspondence claiming official authorization from recognized governmental sources. Fraudulent correspondence occasionally appears among legitimate official communications, requiring careful scrutiny by experienced clerks, capable of identifying suspicious characteristics that might indicate attempts to introduce unauthorized materials into official communication channels. Wax seal examination utilizes magnifying lenses imported from skilled lens makers in the Netherlands, where optical instrument manufacturing has achieved standards of precision superior to domestic French production capabilities. The examination process focuses on identifying the distinctive characteristics of legitimate seals, including the precise details of heraldic designs, the quality and color of sealing wax, and the impression depth that indicates proper seal application by authorized personnel. Paper quality assessment involves examination of watermarks embedded in paper during manufacturing processes that identify specific paper mills authorized to produce materials for governmental correspondence. Different paper mills throughout France and neighboring regions produce papers with distinctive watermark designs that serve as authentication features difficult to reproduce without access to specialized manufacturing equipment used in legitimate paper production facilities. Ink analysis occasionally becomes necessary when correspondence authenticity remains questionable after examination of seals and paper materials. Different ink formulations produce characteristic colors and aging patterns that experienced clerks learn to recognize through years of handling correspondence from various sources throughout the French administrative system and foreign governmental agencies, with which France maintains diplomatic relations. The preparation of outgoing correspondence begins with the selection of appropriate paper materials based on the recipient's social rank and the nature of business addressed in each communication. Correspondence directed to foreign royalty requires the finest paper available from authorized suppliers, while routine administrative communications utilize standard quality paper adequate for official purposes, but less expensive than materials reserved for the most prestigious correspondence applications. Paper selection involves consideration of multiple factors including thickness, surface texture, absorbency characteristics, and durability requirements based on anticipated travel conditions and storage requirements at destination locations. Letters traveling to tropical colonies require paper treatments that provide resistance to humidity and insect damage, while correspondence destined for northern European locations must withstand different environmental challenges, including extended exposure to cold temperatures and moisture from rain or snow. Ink preparation for official correspondence follows formulations developed through years of experimentation to achieve optimal flow characteristics, color consistency, and permanence under various storage conditions. The standard black ink used for most governmental correspondence contains iron gall compounds that produce deep black coloration while maintaining legibility through extended periods without significant fading or deterioration. Special ink formulations serve specific purposes within the correspondence system, including red ink reserved for corrections and marginal annotations made by senior officials, blue ink used for certain categories of diplomatic correspondence, and invisible inks employed for confidential communications requiring additional security measures beyond conventional sealing and addressing protocols. Quill pen preparation requires careful selection of feathers from specific bird species that provide optimal writing characteristics for different types of correspondence work. Goose feathers supply the majority of quills used for routine correspondence, while swan feathers provide superior flexibility and ink capacity necessary for extended writing sessions involving lengthy documents or multiple copies of important communications. The cutting and shaping of quill pens follows traditional techniques that create writing points suitable for different handwriting styles and ink flow requirements. Each clerk maintains several prepared quills with different point configurations, enabling rapid switching between writing tasks without interruption for pen preparation during busy periods when correspondence volume requires sustained writing activity throughout extended work sessions. Quill maintenance involves regular resharpening using specialized knives designed specifically for pen cutting, cleaning of ink residue that might interfere with smooth ink flow, and replacement of worn quills that no longer produce acceptable line quality for official correspondence requiring consistent legibility and professional appearance appropriate to governmental communications. Handwriting standards for official correspondence follow established guidelines that ensure legibility while maintaining the formal appearance expected in governmental communications. Different clerks specialize in various handwriting styles appropriate to different categories of correspondence, with the most skilled calligraphers reserved for letters requiring exceptional presentation quality, such as communications addressed to foreign royalty or important diplomatic documents. The training of correspondence clerks involves apprenticeship periods during which new employees learn proper procedures for handling different categories of official correspondence, develop handwriting skills appropriate to their assigned responsibilities, and acquire knowledge of administrative protocols that govern correspondence processing within the royal bureaucratic system. Apprentice clerks begin with simple copying tasks that allow supervised practice of handwriting techniques while contributing to routine correspondence processing activities. As skills develop, apprentices receive assignments involving increasingly complex correspondence tasks including composition of routine administrative letters, preparation of document copies requiring precise reproduction of original texts, and eventually independent handling of correspondence processing responsibilities. The copying of important documents requires attention to precise reproduction of original text without alterations that might change meaning or create confusion about official governmental policies or decisions. Multiple copies of significant documents often require production for distribution to various administrative offices, foreign diplomatic missions, or archives maintained for future reference purposes. Copy verification involves careful comparison of reproduced text with original documents to ensure accuracy of transcription, proper formatting, and inclusion of all necessary elements such as dates, signatures, and official seals. Error detection requires systematic reading that identifies discrepancies between original and copied materials, followed by correction procedures that maintain document integrity while addressing identified problems. Document storage systems organize correspondence according to multiple classification schemes that enable efficient retrieval of materials for reference purposes or follow-up communications. Primary organization follows chronological arrangement by date of receipt or transmission, while secondary filing systems organize materials by recipient, subject matter, or administrative department responsible for processing specific categories of governmental business. Storage containers include wooden cabinets constructed specifically for correspondence preservation, with individual compartments sized to accommodate different document formats while protecting materials from dust, moisture, and other environmental factors that might cause deterioration of paper and ink materials over extended storage periods. Climate control within storage areas involves attention to temperature and humidity levels that optimize preservation conditions for paper documents while preventing mold formation or insect infestation that could damage stored correspondence. Ventilation systems provide air circulation adequate to prevent moisture accumulation while avoiding drafts that might disturb document organization or create dust problems affecting stored materials. The addressing of outgoing correspondence follows established protocols that reflect both practical delivery requirements and social conventions governing communication between individuals of different ranks within French society and international diplomatic communities. Proper addressing ensures successful delivery while demonstrating appropriate respect for recipients' social positions and governmental authority. Address formatting varies according to recipient categories, with specific requirements for correspondence directed to members of the royal family, high-ranking nobility, governmental ministers, diplomatic representatives, and various levels of provincial administrators throughout French territorial holdings. Each category requires different combinations of titles, honorifics, and addressing conventions that reflect established social hierarchies and administrative relationships. Geographical addressing components include detailed location information necessary for successful delivery through the French postal system and international courier networks. Domestic addresses require identification of provinces, administrative districts, and local communities where recipients maintain residences or conduct official business, while international addresses must conform to addressing conventions recognized by postal systems in destination countries. Postal route planning involves coordination with postal administrators who maintain detailed knowledge of transportation schedules, road conditions, and relay station capabilities along different routes connecting various destinations throughout France and neighboring countries. Route selection affects delivery timing and requires consideration of seasonal factors that might influence travel conditions along different pathways. Courier selection depends on the urgency and confidentiality requirements of specific correspondence categories, with the most sensitive diplomatic communications entrusted to experienced couriers who have demonstrated reliability in handling confidential materials under various travel conditions. Regular administrative correspondence utilizes standard postal services adequate for routine governmental business that does not require exceptional security measures. Courier preparation involves briefing sessions that provide necessary information about delivery requirements, recipient identification procedures, and security protocols appropriate to specific assignments. Couriers receive written instructions detailing their responsibilities, emergency procedures, and contact information for assistance if problems arise during travel to designated destinations. Travel documentation for couriers includes official authorization papers that verify their legitimate authority to transport governmental correspondence, identification documents that establish their personal identity and employment status, and diplomatic credentials when assignments involve travel through foreign territories, where special authorization might be required for safe passage. The packaging of correspondence for courier transport requires attention to protection against weather conditions, physical damage from handling during travel, and unauthorized access by individuals who might attempt to examine confidential communications during transport between origin and destination points. Different packaging methods serve different security and protection requirements based on correspondence sensitivity and anticipated travel conditions. Wax sealing techniques provide primary security for most correspondence categories, utilizing sealing wax formulations that create tamper-evident closures while maintaining flexibility adequate to prevent cracking during normal handling associated with courier transport. Seal application requires heating of sealing wax to optimal temperatures that ensure proper adhesion without damage to paper materials or excessive heating that might affect document contents. Multiple sealing methods provide enhanced security for highly confidential correspondence, including the use of several different seals applied in specific patterns that would be difficult to reproduce without detailed knowledge of established security procedures. Additional security measures might include the use of silk threads embedded in sealing wax or special marking techniques visible only under specific examination conditions. Diplomatic pouch procedures govern the handling of correspondence exchanged between French diplomatic missions and the royal court.
utilizing specially constructed containers that provide maximum security during international transport through territories where French governmental authority cannot ensure protection of correspondence contents. Diplomatic pouches receive recognition under international conventions that prohibit interference with diplomatic communications. The construction of diplomatic pouches utilizes leather materials treated with waterproofing compounds that protect contents against moisture damage during extended travel periods, while metal reinforcement provides physical protection against damage from rough handling during transport through various means including horseback travel, ship transport, and overland wagon conveyance. Diplomatic pouch sealing employs multiple security measures, including complex lock mechanisms that require specific keys held only by authorized diplomatic personnel, wax seals applied in patterns known only to legitimate diplomatic officers, and documentation systems that track pouch movements throughout entire transport processes from origin to final destination. Route security for diplomatic correspondence involves coordination with military authorities, who provide armed escorts when diplomatic pouches travel through areas where banditry or political instability might threaten safe delivery of confidential governmental communications. Escort arrangements require advanced planning and coordination with local military commanders along anticipated travel routes. The timing of courier departures follows schedules coordinated with transportation availability, weather conditions, and recipient requirements that affect optimal delivery timing for different categories of correspondence. Regular postal schedules provide predictable service for routine administrative communications, while emergency courier services accommodate urgent correspondence requiring expedited delivery regardless of additional costs. Weather considerations affect courier travel schedules throughout seasonal cycles, with winter conditions requiring modified routes and extended travel times to accommodate snow, ice, and shortened daylight hours that limit safe travel periods. Summer travel conditions generally allow more direct routes and faster travel times, though extreme heat might require schedule modifications to protect both couriers and correspondence materials. Relay station operations provide essential support for courier services by maintaining supplies, fresh horses, and accommodation facilities at strategic locations along major travel routes. Station management requires coordination with local authorities, who provide security and logistical support necessary for effective courier service operations throughout French territorial holdings. Horse maintenance at relay stations involves provision of adequate feed, veterinary care, and stable facilities necessary to maintain animals in conditions suitable for courier service requirements. Different categories of correspondence service require horses with different capabilities, with emergency courier services utilizing the fastest and most robust animals available for critical delivery assignments. Supply management at relay stations includes stockpiling of food, equipment, and materials necessary to support courier operations throughout seasonal variations and emergency situations that might disrupt normal supply channels. Station inventories require regular replenishment through coordination with regional administrative authorities responsible for maintaining courier service capabilities. Communication between relay stations utilizes signal systems that provide advance notice of courier arrivals, enabling station personnel to prepare necessary supplies and services without delays that might affect delivery schedules. Signal methods include horn calls, flag displays, and messenger services that coordinate activities between adjacent stations along courier routes. Record-keeping systems track courier movements, delivery confirmations, and service performance metrics that enable administrative oversight of correspondence delivery operations throughout the French governmental communication system. Records provide documentation necessary for addressing delivery problems, verifying service completion, and maintaining accountability for correspondence handling procedures. Delivery verification procedures require recipients to provide signed acknowledgements, confirming receipt of correspondence, enabling correspondence administrators to maintain complete records of communication transactions and identify potential problems requiring investigation or corrective action. Verification records also provide legal documentation establishing successful completion of official communication requirements. The return journey procedures for couriers include collection of outgoing correspondence from destination locations, coordination with local administrative officers regarding return cargo, and adherence to security protocols that ensure safe transport of materials during return travel to central correspondence processing facilities. Return correspondence often includes responses to previously delivered communications, requiring careful handling to maintain proper document organization and ensure timely processing upon arrival at central facilities. Return loads might also include documents originating from provincial administrators or foreign diplomatic sources that require processing through established correspondence handling procedures. Quality control measures throughout the correspondence delivery system include regular audits of processing procedures, performance evaluations of personnel involved in correspondence handling, and review of delivery success rates to identify opportunities for improvement in service reliability and efficiency. Performance standards establish expectations for delivery timing, correspondence security, and customer service quality that guide training programs and operational procedures throughout the correspondence system. Standards provide benchmarks for evaluating individual and system performance, while identifying areas requiring additional training or procedural modifications. The evening hours bring completion of daily correspondence processing activities, with final sorting of materials for next-day delivery, secure storage of confidential documents awaiting processing, and preparation of work areas for continuation of correspondence operations during subsequent work periods. Evening procedures ensure continuity of service while maintaining security protocols that protect governmental communications throughout overnight hours when reduced staffing levels require modified security arrangements. Night security measures include locked storage of all correspondence materials, posted guards at facilities containing sensitive documents, and emergency procedures that ensure rapid response to security breaches or other problems that might threaten the integrity of governmental correspondence systems. Security arrangements reflect the critical importance of reliable communication in maintaining effective governmental operations throughout French territorial holdings. Document preservation during overnight storage requires attention to environmental conditions that prevent deterioration of paper and ink materials, while ensuring organized arrangement that facilitates efficient processing resumption during subsequent work periods. Storage procedures balance preservation requirements with operational needs for rapid access to correspondence materials, requiring continued processing activities. The cycle of correspondence operations continues through seasonal variations and changing governmental priorities, with established procedures providing stability and reliability essential for effective communication between royal court and administrative centers throughout France. Each day brings new correspondence, requiring processing through systems refined through decades of administrative experience, ensuring continued effectiveness of governmental communication, essential for maintaining royal authority across extensive territorial holdings that comprise the Kingdom of France in the middle years of the 18th century.
The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Hartwell's pharmaceutical establishment on Regent Street, casting long shadows across rows of mahogany shelving that stretched from floor to ceiling. The air hung heavy with the mingled scents of camphor, rosewater, and the faint metallic tang of mercury preparations, creating an atmosphere that spoke of careful measurement and precise preparation. Sarah Matthews arrived each morning at 6:30, her worn leather boots echoing softly against the polished wooden floors as she made her way through the shop's main dispensary. The keys to the establishment hung from a brass ring at her waist, each one labeled with small paper tags written in the proprietor's careful copperplate hand. The morning cleaning ritual would consume the better part of 3 hours, a methodical progression through each section of the shop that had remained largely unchanged since she had begun her employment 7 years prior. The first task always involved the preparation of the cleaning solutions themselves, a process that required the same attention to proportion and mixture that governed the pharmaceutical preparations sold within these walls. In the small room behind the main counter, Sarah would measure out precise quantities of soft soap, dissolved in heated rainwater, that had been collected in the large ceramic vessels positioned beneath the building's gutters. The soap, manufactured by peers, and delivered monthly in wrapped blocks, dissolved slowly in the warm water, creating a solution that would clean without leaving residue on the delicate glass surfaces of the shop's countless bottles and vessels. For the brass fittings and scales, she prepared a separate mixture using powdered chalk and vinegar, combined in proportions that had been established through years of careful experimentation by her predecessor, Mrs. Whitmore, who had trained Sarah in the particular requirements of pharmaceutical cleaning before her retirement to the countryside near Bath. The vinegar, sourced from Cross and Blackwell, possessed the precise acidity needed to remove the green patination that formed naturally on the brass surfaces without causing damage to the metal itself. The cleaning began systematically with the front windows, massive panes of crown glass that displayed the shop's wares to passers-by on Regent Street. Sarah would begin at the uppermost corner of each window, working her way across in overlapping strokes using a chamois leather that had been soaked in the soap solution and wrung nearly dry. The technique required patience as streaking would mar the clarity needed to properly display the colorful preparations arranged behind the glass. Each section had to be completed before the cleaning solution could dry, requiring a steady rhythm that allowed for consistent coverage while preventing the formation of water spots. The window cleaning alone consumed nearly 40 minutes each morning, as Sarah paid particular attention to the lower portions where the London soot accumulated most heavily. The coal smoke that perpetually hung over the city deposited a fine layer of grime that, if left untreated, would gradually obscure the carefully arranged displays of patent medicines, tooth powders, and medicinal preparations that drew customers into the establishment. Once the windows achieved their proper transparency, Sarah would turn her attention to the extensive shelving that lined the walls of the main dispensary. These shelves, constructed of seasoned mahogany, and fitted with brass rails to prevent bottles from sliding, required dusting with soft cloths made from worn linen sheets that had been cut into precise 12-inch squares. The dusting process followed a specific sequence, beginning with the uppermost shelves and working downward to prevent debris from settling on previously cleaned surfaces. Each shelf contained dozens of pharmaceutical preparations arranged according to a system established by the Royal Pharmaceutical Society's guidelines for proper dispensary organization. The bottles themselves ranged from small vials containing concentrated tinctures to large Winchester bottles holding bulk preparations of commonly prescribed remedies. Sarah had learned to handle each container with the particular care its contents demanded, understanding that some preparations were sensitive to light, while others required protection from moisture or temperature fluctuations. The cleaning of individual bottles presented its own challenges and required techniques specific to the various materials from which they were manufactured. The clear glass bottles used for most liquid preparations could be cleaned with the standard soap solution, but required careful attention to the areas around their cork stoppers, where medicinal residues often accumulated. The amber glass bottles, used to protect light-sensitive preparations, needed gentler handling as their colored glass was more prone to scratching than clear alternatives. For the ceramic drug jars that held powdered preparations, Sarah employed a different technique altogether. These vessels, many bearing the traditional blue and white patterns favored by apothecaries, required cleaning with barely dampened cloths to prevent moisture from penetrating their porous surfaces. The labels on these jars, often hand-lettered in Latin script, demanded particular caution as the ink used in their preparation could be damaged by excessive moisture or improper cleaning agents. The brass scales that occupied the central counter required their own specialized attention. These precision instruments, manufactured by Messrs. Townsend and Mercer of Birmingham, represented significant investments for any pharmaceutical establishment and demanded cleaning techniques that preserved their accuracy while maintaining their appearance. Sarah would first remove the brass pans and chains, cleaning each component separately with the chalk and vinegar solution before polishing them with soft flannel cloths until they achieved the proper golden sheen. The scale mechanisms themselves required even more delicate treatment. The knife edge bearings that enabled precise measurement could be damaged by improper cleaning, so Sarah employed small brushes made from badger hair to remove any dust or residue that might affect their operation. The manufacturer's instructions, carefully preserved in Mr. Hartwell's records, specified that no liquid should ever be applied directly to these mechanisms, requiring instead the use of dry brushing techniques followed by careful inspection to ensure no debris remained. The preparation area behind the main counter contained additional equipment that required daily attention. The marble mortars and pestles used for preparing powdered medications needed thorough cleaning after each day's use, a process that involved multiple stages of washing and drying to prevent cross-contamination between different preparations. The largest mortar, nearly 18 inches in diameter and weighing over 20 pounds, required 2 people to lift safely, so Sarah would clean it in place, using long-handled brushes to reach its deepest recesses. The pill-making equipment presented its own cleaning challenges. The brass pill tiles used for rolling and shaping medicinal preparations retained traces of the various compounds used in their manufacture, requiring careful removal with specialized solvents that would not leave residues affecting future preparations. The wooden pill rollers needed particular attention, as their absorbent surfaces could harbor contamination if not properly maintained. Sarah would clean these implements with solutions of rectified spirits, allowing them to air dry completely before returning them to their designated storage locations. The process of cleaning the numerous medicine bottles and containers that filled the shop's shelves followed a rotation system that ensured each item received thorough attention at regular intervals. On Mondays, Sarah would focus on the bottles containing liquid preparations on the eastern wall of the shop. Tuesdays were devoted to the powder containers and ceramic jars arranged along the western shelving. Wednesdays brought attention to the patent medicine displays near the front windows, while Thursdays focused on the diagnostic instruments and medical apparatus stored in the glass-fronted cabinets. Each day's cleaning routine required different tools and techniques appropriate to the materials and substances involved. The liquid medicine bottles could be cleaned with soap and water, but required careful rinsing to prevent any cleaning residue from contaminating future preparations. Empty bottles needed particular attention, as they would be reused for custom preparations, requiring multiple rinses with distilled water followed by thorough drying to prevent bacterial growth. The powder containers demanded different treatment entirely. Many contained hygroscopic substances that would absorb moisture from the air, potentially altering their medicinal properties or causing them to cake into unusable masses. Sarah learned to work quickly when cleaning these containers, minimizing their exposure to ambient humidity, while ensuring thorough removal of any contamination that might affect the purity of their contents. The patent medicine displays required a balance between cleanliness and preservation of the original packaging that served as both protection and advertisement for the products within. Many of these preparations arrived from their manufacturers in elaborately decorated boxes and bottles that formed an important part of the product's appeal to customers. Sarah had developed techniques for cleaning these packages without damaging their printed labels or decorative elements, using barely damp cloths and avoiding any cleaning agents that might affect the inks or dyes used in their decoration. The medical instruments and diagnostic equipment stored in the locked cabinets demanded the highest standards of cleanliness, as these items would come into direct contact with patients during examinations and treatments. The stethoscopes, manufactured by the renowned firm of Ferguson and Sons, required careful cleaning of both their brass and rubber components using different techniques appropriate to each material. The brass portions could be polished with the same chalk and vinegar solution used elsewhere in the shop, while the rubber tubing needed gentler treatment with soap and water to prevent degradation of the material. The ophthalmoscopes and other optical instruments required even more specialized care. Their precision ground lenses could be damaged by improper cleaning techniques, requiring the use of specially prepared lens papers and cleaning solutions that would not leave residues affecting their optical properties. Sarah had been trained in these techniques by Mr. Hartwell himself, who had learned them during his apprenticeship with a prominent Harley Street physician before establishing his own pharmaceutical practice. The daily cleaning routine also included attention to the shop's floors, which bore the traffic of numerous customers, delivery men and professional visitors throughout each day. The wooden floors, constructed of seasoned oak planks fitted tightly together, required sweeping with soft bristled brooms to avoid scratching their polished surfaces. The sweeping followed a specific pattern designed to direct dust and debris toward the rear of the shop, where it could be collected and disposed of without creating clouds of dust that might settle on the clean merchandise. After sweeping, the floors received treatment with a mixture of beeswax and turpentine that preserved the wood while providing protection against the constant foot traffic. This mixture, prepared weekly in small batches to prevent it from hardening in storage, was applied sparingly with soft cloths and buffed to a gentle sheen that enhanced the natural grain of the oak without creating a slippery surface that might endanger customers or staff. The counter surfaces throughout the shop required daily attention due to their constant use in serving customers and preparing medications. These surfaces, constructed of polished marble selected for its resistance to staining and chemical reactions, could be cleaned with soap and water but required immediate drying to prevent water spots from marring their appearance. The marble's natural porosity meant that certain substances, particularly acidic preparations, could cause permanent staining if not cleaned promptly after spills. The brass fixtures throughout the shop, including door handles, window latches and decorative elements, required weekly polishing to maintain their appearance and prevent the formation of verdigris that could transfer to customers' hands or clothing. Sarah had developed a rotation schedule that ensured each brass element received attention at appropriate intervals, using the chalk and vinegar solution for cleaning followed by buffing with soft cloths to achieve the proper luster. The gas lighting fixtures that illuminated the shop during evening hours required particular attention due to the soot they produced during operation. The glass chimneys that protected the flames needed daily cleaning to maintain proper illumination, while the brass fixtures required regular polishing to prevent corrosion from the combustion products. The cleaning of these fixtures required careful attention to safety procedures, as the gas supply needed to be shut off completely before any maintenance could be performed. The process of maintaining the shop's extensive collection of reference books and pharmaceutical guides required different techniques than those used for the merchandise and equipment. These volumes, many bound in leather and representing significant investments in professional knowledge, needed protection from dust and moisture while remaining readily accessible for consultation during the preparation of prescriptions. Sarah had learned to clean these books using soft brushes that removed dust without damaging their bindings, followed by the application of specialized leather treatments that preserved the material against cracking and deterioration. The prescription records and customer files that accumulated throughout each day required careful organization and storage to ensure their availability when needed while protecting them from damage or loss. These documents, written on high-quality paper using permanent inks, were stored in wooden filing cabinets that required regular cleaning to prevent dust accumulation that might make the records difficult to locate or read. As the morning cleaning routine progressed toward its completion, Sarah would turn her attention to the final details that ensured the shop's readiness for the day's business. The cash drawer required counting and organization of the previous day's receipts, while the appointment book needed preparation for the day's scheduled consultations with customers seeking advice on medicinal preparations or health concerns. The cleaning supplies themselves required attention and maintenance to ensure their continued effectiveness. The cloths and brushes used throughout the shop needed washing and proper storage to prevent bacterial growth that might contaminate the surfaces they were meant to clean. The soap solutions required daily preparation in appropriate quantities to ensure their effectiveness while avoiding waste of expensive materials. The various cleaning agents stored in the shop's supply room needed periodic inventory and reordering to prevent shortages that might disrupt the daily routine. Sarah maintained detailed records of these supplies, noting consumption rates and quality variations that might affect their performance in maintaining the shop's standards of cleanliness and appearance. The final stage of each morning's routine involved a careful inspection of the entire establishment to ensure that all cleaning tasks had been completed to the proper standard. This inspection followed the same systematic approach used throughout the cleaning process, beginning with the front windows and progressing through each section of the shop in a predetermined sequence that ensured nothing was overlooked.
The inspection process itself required nearly 30 minutes to complete thoroughly, as Sarah examined each surface, container and piece of equipment with the same attention to detail that characterized the cleaning routine itself. She carried with her a small notebook bound in green Morocco leather, its pages ruled with faint blue lines, where she recorded any observations requiring follow-up attention or supplies needing replenishment. The front windows received the first scrutiny, examined from both interior and exterior perspectives to ensure that no streaking or residue remained to obscure the carefully arranged displays. Sarah would position herself at various angles relative to the morning light, checking for any imperfections that might become apparent to customers viewing the shop from the street. The slightest trace of streaking would require immediate attention, as Miss Hartwell had emphasized that the windows served as the establishment's primary advertisement to potential customers. Moving systematically through the main dispensary, Sarah would examine each shelf section, checking not only for cleanliness but also for proper organization of the merchandise according to the established system.
The bell of St. Augustine's Abbey began its measured tolling at 4 o'clock in the morning, its bronze voice carrying across the stone corridors and wooden galleries where 37 novices prepared for another day devoted to the systematic recitation of Latin texts that formed the foundation of their theological education. Brother Thomas adjusted his woolen habit against the October chill that crept through the limestone walls, feeling the familiar weight of the breviary bound in brown calfskin that he would carry throughout the hours ahead. The preparation for the day's recitation began in the scriptorium, a long hall illuminated by narrow windows that faced eastward to catch the earliest light. Each novice occupied a designated position at tables constructed from seasoned oak, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of scholarly use. The tables were arranged in precise rows, with careful spacing that allowed each student to stand and pace without disturbing his neighbors during the extended periods of vocal exercise that comprised their daily routine. Brother Thomas opened his breviary to the marked passages designated for the morning session, running his finger along the lines of carefully hand-copied text that would occupy the next 4 hours of concentrated recitation. The Latin words, written in the clear minuscule script favored by the abbey's scribes, required careful pronunciation that honored both the language's classical heritage and its adaptation to Christian liturgical use. Each syllable demanded attention to quantity and stress, elements that transformed mere reading into the rhythmic chanting that facilitated both memorization and spiritual contemplation. The morning session commenced with the recitation of the Pater Noster, spoken in unison by all 37 voices under the guidance of Brother Michael, whose 40 years of monastic life had refined his Latin pronunciation to a precision that served as the standard for all novices. The familiar words rolled through the scriptorium with measured cadence, each phrase separated by the slight pause that allowed breath control while maintaining the text's natural flow. The acoustic properties of the stone chamber enhanced the vocal resonance, creating harmonics that reinforced correct pronunciation while revealing any deviations from the established norm. Following the opening prayer, the novices began individual recitation of assigned passages from the Vulgate Bible, starting with portions of the Gospel according to St. Matthew that had been selected for their combination of theological significance and linguistic complexity. Brother Thomas opened to the 5th chapter, where the Beatitudes presented a series of parallel constructions that required careful attention to the relationship between Latin syntax and meaning. Each Beatitude began with the word be, followed by variations in case and construction that demonstrated fundamental principles of Latin grammar while conveying spiritual truths. The recitation of Beati Popperis Spiritu, quoniam ipsorum est regnum caelorum, required attention to the ablative construction spiritu and the genitive ipsorum, grammatical relationships that novices learned through repetition rather than formal grammatical instruction. Brother Thomas spoke each word distinctly, allowing the vowel sounds to resonate fully before proceeding to the next syllable. The phrase demanded nearly 30 seconds of careful pronunciation, with emphasis placed on the long vowels that carried the phrase's rhythmic structure. As the morning progressed, individual recitation gave way to alternating verses, where pairs of novices would exchange lines of text in a pattern that required careful attention to timing and pronunciation. Brother Thomas partnered with Brother Benedict, a novice from Normandy, whose native French influenced his Latin pronunciation in ways that required constant correction. The alternating recitation of Psalm 119, the longest psalm in the Psalter, provided extensive practice in maintaining vocal clarity over extended periods, while managing the complex Hebrew-influenced syntax that characterized much of the psalmic literature. The psalm's opening verses, Beati immaculati in via qui ambulant in legi domini, established a pattern of pronunciation that would continue for nearly 2 hours. Each verse required approximately 45 seconds of careful recitation, with pauses between verses allowing for breath control and mental preparation for the complex grammatical structures ahead. The psalm's acrostic structure in Hebrew had been preserved partially in the Latin translation, creating repetitive patterns that aided memorization, while providing extensive practice in handling Latin's inflected forms. Brother Thomas found his voice settling into the rhythm established by centuries of monastic recitation, his breathing naturally adjusting to accommodate the phrase lengths demanded by the Latin text. The vowel sounds, particularly the long A in ambulant and the diphthong A in legi, required careful shaping of the mouth and tongue position that became automatic through repetition. The consonant clusters, such as the mempol in templum and the scr in scriptura, demanded precise articulation that strengthened the vocal apparatus through constant exercise. The mid-morning session introduced more complex texts from the Church Fathers, beginning with selected passages from St. Augustine's Confessions that presented both theological depth and sophisticated Latin prose style. The opening of Book 10, Cognoscam 10:10, Cognitor meus cognoscam sicate cognitus summa 10, challenged the novices with its wordplay and philosophical complexity, while providing practice in the subjunctive mood and reflexive constructions that characterized Augustine's mature Latin style. Brother Thomas approached Augustine's text with the careful attention to meaning that distinguished theological recitation from mere pronunciation exercise. Each phrase required understanding of its theological context as well as its grammatical structure, demanding mental engagement that prevented the mechanical repetition that might otherwise characterize extended vocal exercise. The phrase vis enim misericordiae tuae praesti urum tuum required not only correct pronunciation of the difficult consonant cluster in praesti but also comprehension of the theological concept being expressed regarding divine mercy and justice. The recitation of Augustine's prose demanded different vocal techniques than those used for biblical texts, as the Church Fathers' rhetorical training influenced his sentence structure in ways that required longer breath control and more varied intonation patterns. Sentences often extended for several minutes of continuous recitation, with subordinate clauses nested within complex constructions that challenged both memory and lung capacity. Brother Thomas learned to identify natural breathing points within these extended periods, usually at the conclusion of dependent clauses or before major conjunctions. As the morning session continued, the novices progressed to antiphonal recitation of selected hymns composed by Venantius Fortunatus, whose 6th century poetry combined classical Latin metrics with Christian theological content. The hymn Pange, Lingua Gloriosi pro Liam Certamini, required attention to both quantitative meter and the melodic patterns that accompanied sung versions of the text. Even when recited rather than sung, the hymns retained rhythmic structures that influenced pronunciation and pacing. The quantitative meter of Latin poetry demanded understanding of syllable length that differed significantly from the stress-based patterns of vernacular languages. Brother Thomas learned to distinguish between naturally long and short syllables, as well as syllables lengthened by position through consonant clusters or doubled consonants. The line Pange, Lingua Gloriosi pro Liam Certaminis contained examples of both natural length in Gloriosi and positional length in pro Liam, distinctions that affected both pronunciation and the poem's rhythmic structure. The noon session, conducted in the Abbey's chapter house to accommodate the assembled community, focused on readings from the Rule of Saint Benedict that governed monastic life. The Latin of the Rule, composed in the 6th century, reflected the transitional period between classical and medieval Latin usage, presenting vocabulary and constructions that bridged ancient and contemporary forms. Chapter 7, concerning humility, provided extensive practice in abstract theological vocabulary, while reinforcing the behavioral expectations that shaped monastic life. The recitation of primus humilitatis gradus est, si timorem deicbi ante oculos semper ponens required attention to the complex relationship between the ablative absolute construction and the conditional clause that followed. Brother Thomas found that understanding the grammatical relationship enhanced his ability to pronounce the passage with appropriate emphasis and pacing. The theological concept of humility's first degree demanded respectful pronunciation that reflected the seriousness of the spiritual instruction being conveyed. The afternoon sessions introduced more advanced texts, including selected passages from St. Jerome's biblical commentaries that demonstrated the sophisticated Latin prose style developed for scholarly theological discourse. Jerome's commentary on the Gospel of Matthew presented particular challenges due to its extensive quotations from both biblical and classical sources, requiring familiarity with different stylistic registers within the same extended passage. The commentary's method of lemma and explanation created alternating patterns of biblical citation and interpretive discourse that demanded different vocal approaches. Brother Thomas encountered Jerome's discussion of the parable of the sower, where the biblical text et exiat quae seminat seminar was followed by extensive theological interpretation that employed the technical vocabulary of biblical exegesis. Terms such as allegoria, tropologia, and anagoria represented specialized usage that required precise pronunciation while conveying the methodological sophistication of patristic biblical interpretation. The recitation of such passages demanded not only vocal accuracy, but also intellectual engagement with the hermeneutical principles being articulated. The extended afternoon recitation included passages from the Vulgate's translation of St. Paul's epistles, texts that presented particular challenges due to their complex Greek-influenced syntax and abstract theological vocabulary. The opening of Romans, Paulus servus Therisu Christi, Vocatus Apostolos, Segregatus in Evangelium Dei, established patterns of attribution and theological identification that would recur throughout the Pauline corpus. Each element of Paul's self-identification required careful pronunciation that honored both the apostle's authority and the theological precision of his language. Brother Thomas found that the theological density of Pauline texts demanded slower recitation than narrative biblical passages, allowing time for the mind to engage with concepts such as justification, sanctification, and glorification that formed the foundation of Christian soteriology. The phrase Justificati ergo fide pacem habemus ad diem predominum nostrum osum Christum required nearly 2 minutes of careful pronunciation, with emphasis on the theological relationships expressed through Latin's inflected forms. The recitation of complex theological arguments such as Paul's discussion of predestination in Romans 9 challenged both vocal endurance and intellectual comprehension. Extended periods of concentration on abstract theological concepts expressed through sophisticated Latin constructions created mental fatigue that required careful management through varied pacing and occasional brief meditation on the meanings being expressed. Brother Thomas learned to use the natural pauses between sentences for silent reflection that refreshed both mind and voice for continued recitation. As the afternoon progressed, the novices engaged in responsive recitation of selected psalms with alternating verses divided between two groups positioned on opposite sides of the chapter house. This antiphonal arrangement, traditional in monastic worship, required careful attention to timing and vocal balance while maintaining the meditative quality appropriate to psalmic prayer. Psalm 136, with its repeated refrain Quoniam in aeternum misericordia eius, provided practice in maintaining consistent pronunciation and volume across multiple repetitions while preserving the phrase's devotional significance. The responsive recitation demanded different skills than individual pronunciation exercise, requiring awareness of other voices while maintaining personal vocal clarity and theological engagement. Brother Thomas learned to listen carefully to his colleagues' pronunciation while preparing his own verses, creating a communal experience of textual engagement that transcended individual study.
The acoustic properties of the chapter house, with its stone walls and vaulted ceiling, created natural harmonics that enhanced the collective recitation while revealing any inconsistencies in pronunciation or timing. The evening session, conducted by candlelight in the Abbey's library, focused on advanced theological texts that required sophisticated Latin comprehension and careful vocal interpretation. Selected passages from St. Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theological presented systematic theological argumentation that demanded understanding of scholastic methodology while providing practice in technical philosophical vocabulary. The structure of question, objection, and response characteristic of scholastic method created varied patterns of recitation that engaged different vocal techniques within the same extended passage. Brother Thomas approached Aquinas's discussion of divine attributes with the careful attention to logical structure that distinguished scholastic from patristic texts. The opening formula, Utrum Deus sit, followed by systematic analysis of objections and authorities, required pronunciation that conveyed both the philosophical rigor and theological reverence appropriate to discussion of divine nature. Each objection began with videtur quod, followed by syllogistic reasoning that demanded clear articulation of logical relationships expressed through Latin's precise grammatical structures. The recitation of Aquinas's responses, typically beginning with respondio dicendum quod, required different vocal emphasis than the objections, as these passages presented authoritative theological conclusions rather than positions to be refuted. Brother Thomas learned to modulate his voice to reflect the logical structure of scholastic argumentation while maintaining the devotional attitude appropriate to theological study. The phrase Deus sit semis subsistens demanded pronunciation that conveyed both philosophical precision and religious awe. As the evening recitation continued, the novices encountered increasingly complex passages that tested both their Latin comprehension and vocal endurance. Aquinas's discussion of angelic nature, with its extensive use of Aristotelian philosophical vocabulary, required familiarity with terms such as substantia, accidens, and forma, that carried specific meanings in scholastic discourse. The recitation of such passages demanded not only accurate pronunciation but also intellectual engagement with the philosophical concepts being expressed. The final session of each day focused on memorized recitation of selected passages that had been committed to memory through extended repetition over previous weeks and months. This exercise in memoria verborum required perfect accuracy in both pronunciation and text, as any deviation would be immediately apparent to the supervising brothers who followed along in their own copies. Brother Thomas had memorized the first 3 chapters of St. John's Gospel, a task that had required daily repetition for nearly 6 months. The memorized recitation of In principio erat verbum et verbum erat apud Deum et Deus erat verbum demanded not only perfect textual accuracy, but also pronunciation that conveyed the theological profundity of the opening verses. Each word carried theological weight that required respectful articulation, while the parallel structure of the Latin clauses created rhythmic patterns that aided both memory and devotional engagement. The progression from verbum to Deus within the same sentence required careful emphasis that honored both the distinction and unity of the divine persons. The extended memorization exercise tested not only individual preparation but also collective attention, as the entire community of novices recited together passages that had been learned through months of daily repetition. Any error by a single voice would disrupt the communal recitation and require repetition of the entire passage. This collective responsibility created additional motivation for thorough preparation while reinforcing the communal nature of monastic life and study. Brother Thomas found that the memorized recitation created a different relationship with the Latin text than reading-based exercises, as the words emerged from internal contemplation rather than visual recognition. The rhythm and cadence of memorized passages became internalized through repetition, creating natural patterns of emphasis and pacing that enhanced both pronunciation and theological understanding. The phrase et lux in tenebris lucet et tenebrae non comprehenderunt flowed with practiced ease while retaining its capacity to inspire theological reflection. The day's recitation concluded with the communal recitation of Compline, the Church's final liturgical hour, which provided closure to the extended period of Latin vocal exercise while maintaining the devotional context that gave meaning to the day's scholarly work. The familiar prayers and psalms of Compline required no conscious attention to pronunciation after months of daily repetition, allowing the novices to focus entirely on the devotional content while their voices automatically produced the correct Latin sounds. As the community dispersed to their cells for the night's rest, Brother Thomas reflected on the gradual transformation that daily Latin recitation was producing in both his vocal apparatus and his theological understanding. The extended hours of careful pronunciation were strengthening his voice while making Latin syntax increasingly natural and intuitive. More importantly, the constant engagement with sacred texts in their original language was deepening his appreciation for the precision and beauty of theological expression that had been refined through centuries of scholarly development. The physical effects of extended daily recitation included strengthened respiratory capacity and improved vocal resonance that enhanced both speaking and singing ability. The careful attention to vowel formation and consonant articulation required for correct Latin pronunciation created habits of clear speech that improved communication in all contexts. The disciplined breathing required for extended recitation developed lung capacity and control that supported both vocal endurance and general physical health. The intellectual benefits of intensive Latin recitation included improved memory capacity and enhanced ability to engage with complex grammatical structures that trained the mind for sophisticated theological reasoning. The daily encounter with varied Latin styles from biblical simplicity to scholastic complexity developed linguistic sensitivity that enhanced appreciation for the nuances of theological expression. The memorization exercises strengthened mental discipline while creating an internal library of sacred texts that could be recalled for private meditation and reflection. Brother Thomas settled into his narrow cell with the satisfaction of another day devoted to the systematic acquisition of the linguistic tools necessary for advanced theological study. His throat carried the slight soreness that accompanied intensive vocal exercise while his mind retained echoes of the Latin phrases that had filled the preceding hours. The rhythm of daily recitation was gradually transforming both his intellectual capacity and his spiritual sensibility, preparing him for the advanced studies that would occupy the years ahead. The monastery bell tolled the hour of complete silence, its bronze voice carrying across stone corridors now empty of the Latin words that had filled them throughout the day. Yet even in the approaching quiet, the systematic nature of the daily recitation routine continued to shape the intellectual and spiritual development of each novice through methods refined over centuries of monastic practice. The weekly schedule of Latin recitation followed patterns established by generations of scholarly monks, with each day devoted to specific types of texts that provided comprehensive exposure to the language's various registers and applications. Mondays traditionally focused on biblical narrative passages that provided foundational vocabulary and syntax, while Tuesdays introduced psalmic literature with its distinctive Hebrew-influenced structures. Wednesdays brought attention to patristic texts that demonstrated the adaptation of classical Latin to Christian theological purposes, and Thursdays explored scholastic writings that employed the language's most sophisticated philosophical applications. The progression through different textual genres required adaptation of vocal techniques appropriate to each style's particular demands. Biblical narrative, with its relatively straightforward syntax and concrete vocabulary, allowed for moderate pacing that emphasized clarity and comprehension. The recitation of Genesis, beginning with In principio crevit Deus caelum et terram, established patterns of pronunciation that would serve throughout the biblical corpus while introducing fundamental theological concepts through accessible Latin constructions.
Brother Thomas had learned to recognize the distinctive characteristics of biblical Latin that reflected its origins in Greek and Hebrew texts, translated by Saint Jerome and other early Christian scholars. The phrase ete dixit Deus, fiat lux, ete fiat ete lux, demonstrated the simple coordination typical of biblical style, while the repetitive structure aided memorization and created natural rhythm for extended recitation. The translation's fidelity to Semitic syntax created occasional awkwardness in Latin that required careful pronunciation to maintain both accuracy and intelligibility. The recitation of biblical genealogies, such as those found in the opening chapters of Matthew's Gospel, presented particular challenges due to their unfamiliar proper names and repetitive structure. The phrase Abraham autem genuit Isaac, Isaac autem genuit Jacoba, Jacoba autem genuit Ordem, et fratres eius, required careful attention to Hebrew names that did not follow standard Latin phonetic patterns. Brother Thomas practiced these passages repeatedly, learning to pronounce names like Achaz and Ezekias with the same precision demanded for classical Latin vocabulary. The transition from biblical to psalmic texts required different vocal approaches, suited to the poetic nature of the Psalter. The parallelism characteristic of Hebrew poetry, preserved in the Latin translation, created patterns of repetition and variation that enhanced memorization, while demanding sensitivity to the relationship between corresponding phrases. Psalm 23, beginning with Dominus regit me et nihil mihi derit, demonstrated typical psalmic structure with its metaphorical language and emotional intensity that required pronunciation reflecting both intellectual understanding and devotional engagement. The alphabetic psalms, such as Psalm 119, presented unique challenges due to their artificial structure that organized verses according to Hebrew letters rather than natural thematic development. Each section, beginning with verses corresponding to a Hebrew letter, created units of 8 verses that could be memorized and recited as discrete blocks while maintaining awareness of the psalm's overall unity. The recitation of these extended passages required careful pacing to prevent mental fatigue while preserving the devotional quality that distinguished liturgical from academic exercise. Brother Thomas found that the repetitive nature of psalmic recitation created opportunities for deeper engagement with theological concepts through gradual contemplation of familiar phrases. The repeated recitation of Misericordia et Veritas, obvia verunt, sibi, Justitia et pax osculatae, sunt, allowed exploration of the relationship between divine attributes that might be missed in casual reading. The Latin vocabulary of theology, with terms like Misericordia, Veritas, and Justitia, acquired deeper meaning through repeated pronunciation in varied contexts. The seasonal variation in assigned texts provided exposure to the Church's liturgical cycle, while reinforcing the connection between academic study and spiritual practice. During Advent, the recitation focused on prophetic texts that employed distinctive vocabulary and imagery related to messianic expectation. The recitation of Isaiah's prophecies such as Ecce Virgo concipiet et pariet filium required pronunciation that honored both the prophetic authority of the text and its fulfillment in Christian understanding. The Christmas season brought extended recitation of infancy narratives from Matthew and Luke, texts that combined historical narrative with theological interpretation in ways that challenged both comprehension and pronunciation. The Magnificat, with its sophisticated poetic structure and complex theological content, demanded careful attention to the relationship between Mary's personal experience and the broader salvation history being celebrated. The phrase Magnificat, anima mihi et dominum, et exultavit, spiritus meus in Deo salutari meo, required pronunciation that conveyed both personal devotion and theological profundity. The Lenten season introduced extensive recitation of penitential texts that employed distinctive vocabulary related to confession, forgiveness and spiritual renewal. Psalm 51, the Miserere, became a daily exercise in the pronunciation of theological terms related to sin and redemption. The opening verse, Miserere, mea, Deus, secundum magnum, misericordiam tuum, required careful articulation that reflected both personal humility and confidence in divine mercy. The psalm's extensive vocabulary of sin, including terms like iniquitas, peccatum, and delictum, provided practice in theological precision while fostering appropriate spiritual attitudes. The recitation of the Passion narratives during Holy Week required different vocal approaches that reflected the solemnity of the events being commemorated. The account of Jesus' trial before Pilate, with its dramatic dialogue and theological tension, demanded pronunciation that conveyed both historical accuracy and religious reverence. The The phrase quidus veritas required careful articulation that honored both Pilate's philosophical confusion and the irony of his question addressed to truth incarnate. The Easter season brought extended recitation of texts celebrating the resurrection and its theological implications. The Gospel accounts of the empty tomb, with their combination of historical detail and theological significance, required pronunciation that reflected both the factual nature of the events and their transformative meaning for Christian faith. The angelic proclamation, non est hic, surrexit enim, sicet, dixit, demanded articulation that conveyed both the messenger's authority and the revolutionary nature of their announcement. The summer months provided opportunities for more leisurely exploration of theological texts that required sustained attention and careful development. The recitation of extended passages from the Church Fathers allowed deeper engagement with sophisticated theological argumentation, while providing practice in the varied Latin styles employed by different authors. St. Augustine's Confessions, with their autobiographical immediacy and theological depth, demanded pronunciation that honored both the personal nature of Augustine's experience and the universal significance of his insights. The recitation of Augustine's account of his conversion in the Milan garden required careful attention to the emotional intensity of the narrative, while maintaining the objective tone appropriate to theological instruction. The phrase tol, lei, ge, demanded pronunciation that conveyed both the urgency of the child's voice and the providential significance Augustine attributed to these words. The subsequent description of his encounter with Paul's letter to the Romans required articulation that reflected both the historical significance of the moment and its theological importance for understanding divine grace. The autumn months brought intensive recitation of scholastic texts that employed Latin's most sophisticated philosophical applications. The systematic methodology of scholastic theology, with its careful distinction between authorities, objections, and conclusions, required pronunciation that reflected the logical rigor of the arguments while maintaining the devotional context that gave meaning to theological speculation. Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologica provided extensive practice in the technical vocabulary of scholastic philosophy, while demonstrating the systematic application of reason to theological questions. The recitation of Thomas's famous 5 ways for demonstrating God's existence required careful pronunciation that honored both the logical structure of the arguments and their theological purpose. The first way, based on motion, began with manifestum est animus sensibus apparet, aliqua movere, in hoc mundo, and proceeded through careful logical steps that demanded clear articulation of each premise and conclusion. The technical terminology of Aristotelian philosophy, including terms like potentia, actus, and primum movens, required precise pronunciation that conveyed their specific philosophical meanings. The daily routine of Latin recitation was supported by extensive preparatory work that ensured accurate pronunciation and basic comprehension of the texts being studied. Each novice maintained a personal notebook, where unfamiliar vocabulary was recorded with definitions and grammatical analysis that aided both understanding and memorization. Brother Thomas's notebook, bound in brown leather and written in careful script, contained hundreds of entries that reflected months of systematic vocabulary development. The preparation process included consultation of authoritative sources that provided guidance on correct pronunciation and interpretation of difficult passages. The Abbey's library contained multiple copies of Jerome's Latin Bible, with annotations by generations of scholars who had identified challenging constructions and provided alternative readings where manuscripts differed. The availability of multiple sources allowed verification of disputed readings while providing insight into the textual tradition that preserved sacred texts across centuries of transmission. The library also contained extensive collections of patristic commentaries that provided theological context for biblical passages while demonstrating the sophisticated Latin prose style developed for scholarly discourse. The commentaries of John Chrysostom, translated from Greek into Latin, presented particular challenges due to their rhetorical sophistication and cultural references that required extensive background knowledge for full comprehension. The recitation of these texts demanded not only accurate pronunciation but also awareness of the theological controversies and pastoral concerns that shaped their original composition. The scholastic commentaries provided systematic analysis of biblical and patristic texts according to the methodological principles developed in medieval universities. The biblical commentaries of Albert the Great and Thomas Aquinas demonstrated the application of Aristotelian philosophical categories to theological questions while providing models of scholarly precision in Latin expression. The recitation of these commentaries required familiarity with both the philosophical vocabulary and the theological questions that motivated their composition. The practice of Latin recitation extended beyond formal study periods to include the entire cycle of liturgical prayer that structured monastic life. The 7 canonical hours from Matins through Compline provided daily opportunities for Latin pronunciation practice while maintaining the devotional context that gave meaning to linguistic study. The antiphons, responsories and versicles that comprised the liturgical office required precise timing and coordination that enhanced both individual and communal prayer. The seasonal variations in liturgical texts provided exposure to the full range of Latin poetry and prose employed in Christian worship. The hymns of Ambrose, with their sophisticated meter and theological content, required attention to both quantitative versification and devotional meaning. The sequences composed for major feasts, such as the Dies Irae and Veni Creator Spiritus, demanded pronunciation that honored both their poetic structure and their liturgical function. The practice of liturgical recitation also included the proper of the Mass, with its seasonal variations that provided extensive exposure to biblical and patristic texts arranged for liturgical use. The graduals and alleluias that varied according to the church year required careful pronunciation that reflected their function as responses to the scriptural readings while maintaining their character as sung prayer. Even when recited rather than sung, these texts retained melodic qualities that influenced their pronunciation and pacing. The development of Latin pronunciation skills was supported by systematic attention to the physical aspects of vocal production that enabled sustained recitation without fatigue or damage. The monks learned breathing techniques that supported extended vocal exercise while maintaining the relaxed posture appropriate to contemplative study. The coordination of breath, voice, and posture required constant attention that gradually became automatic through daily practice. The acoustic properties of the various spaces used for recitation influenced both pronunciation techniques and vocal development. The stone-walled chapter house, with its natural reverberation, enhanced vocal resonance while requiring careful attention to clarity that prevented individual words from becoming indistinct. The wooden choir stalls, with their acoustic properties designed to support choral singing, provided optimal conditions for both individual and communal recitation. The abbey's scriptorium, with its high ceiling and sound-absorbing wooden furnishings, created conditions that favored individual study while allowing monitoring of pronunciation accuracy by supervising brothers. The different acoustic environments required adaptation of vocal techniques appropriate to each space's particular characteristics while maintaining consistent standards of pronunciation accuracy and theological engagement. The systematic nature of monastic Latin education included regular assessment of progress through formal examinations that tested both pronunciation accuracy and comprehension of theological content. These examinations, conducted quarterly by senior brothers with extensive scholarly training, provided feedback on individual development while identifying areas requiring additional attention. The examination process included both individual recitation and written exercises that demonstrated understanding of grammatical principles and theological concepts. Brother Thomas approached each examination with careful preparation that included review of previously studied texts and intensive practice with passages identified as particularly challenging. The examination format included sight reading of unfamiliar texts that tested both pronunciation skills and the ability to apply grammatical knowledge to new material. The ability to pronounce unfamiliar Latin text accurately on first encounter represented a significant milestone in the development of scholarly competence. The examination also included questions about theological content that demonstrated understanding of the texts being recited rather than mere mechanical pronunciation. The integration of linguistic and theological education ensured that Latin studies served its ultimate purpose of enabling sophisticated engagement with the Church's intellectual tradition. The
The successful completion of these examinations marked progression through the stages of monastic formation while preparing novices for the advanced theological studies that would occupy their mature years. The long-term effects of intensive Latin recitation extended beyond immediate educational goals to include permanent changes in intellectual capacity and spiritual sensibility. The daily engagement with sophisticated theological texts in their original language created familiarity with patterns of thought and expression that shaped both scholarly method and devotional practice. The gradual internalization of Latin syntax and vocabulary created linguistic intuition that enabled increasingly sophisticated engagement with theological literature. The memorization exercises that formed a crucial component of Latin education created permanent repositories of sacred texts that could be recalled for private meditation and spiritual reflection. The ability to recite extended passages from memory provided independence from written texts that enabled contemplative prayer in any circumstances. The internalized texts became resources for spiritual reflection that enriched both formal prayer and private devotion throughout the monastic life. The development of vocal skills through extended Latin recitation created capabilities that enhanced all aspects of monastic life, from liturgical celebration to scholarly discourse. The careful attention to pronunciation and breath control developed through Latin study improved both speaking and singing ability while creating habits of clear communication that served both individual and communal needs. The discipline required for accurate recitation fostered general intellectual discipline that supported all scholarly endeavors. As the months of systematic Latin recitation continued, Brother Thomas found himself increasingly able to engage with theological texts as sources of both intellectual stimulation and spiritual nourishment. The language that had initially required conscious effort to pronounce correctly was becoming a natural medium for theological thought and devotional expression. The integration of linguistic skill and theological understanding created the foundation for a lifetime of scholarly service within the monastic community. The bells of the abbey continued their ancient rhythm, marking the hours that structured a life devoted to the systematic acquisition of the linguistic and intellectual tools necessary for theological scholarship. In cells throughout the monastery, novices settled into sleep with minds filled with Latin words and phrases that were gradually becoming as familiar as their native languages, while their voices carried the slight hoarseness that testified to another day of patient practice in the sacred language that would serve them throughout their monastic lives.